Hey guys, my name is Brady Howell. Thank you so much for checking out this video sermon. This is for my advanced preaching class. This is my narrative sermon presented in manuscript form. And so I'll be using my manuscript that I've written here to kind of present what I want to talk to you guys about today during our time together. Today, for the remainder of this video, I really want to talk about the book of Esther. The book of Esther is kind of a unique book in the Old Testament. It's the only book in the Bible that doesn't mention God once. There's no reference to God. There's no reference to the Trinity, the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. None of that is directly mentioned in Esther. However, there are several different metaphors for the Trinity, as well as several biblical themes occurring throughout, such as boldness and confidence in the Lord, and in knowing who you are, and in using the authority that has been given to you by King Jesus for the betterment of the world. And so with all of that said, just a little bit more of a background on the book of Esther. The author is unknown. We have no idea who the original writer of the book was. Of course, the author himself was the Lord. But as far as actually who penned Esther to begin with and this story, no one really knows. The events of Esther are believed to have occurred between 483 BC and 473 BC. This was during the first half of the reign of King Xerxes, and the story starts at a banquet that the king was throwing. The king wanted to have fun, so he threw a banquet for all of those that were in the fortress of Susa during this time period. And this was quite the banquet. This banquet was several days long, and on about the seventh day of the banquet, King Xerxes has had a little too much fun, and he calls to his Queen Vashti at the time, to kind of come in. King Xerxes wants to show her off in front of the nobles and just the different other royal members, the other royal guys that he has around him. And so in kind of a jerk move, he asked Queen Vashti to come over to really show her off, kind of as just a trophy wife. And Queen Vashti's not having it. She's got a little too much self-respect, and she actually denies the king's orders, which was a big no-no during that time period. You didn't just deny the king and what he wanted you to do. So this kind of infuriated the king to the point of where he was so concerned that Queen Vashti's actions would actually lead to other wives not listening to their husbands as well. And so to prevent this, King Xerxes wrote a decree that Queen Vashti should be banished from the kingdom and was no longer queen. And so because of this, now the king had a problem. He needed a new queen. The kingdom needed a new queen. So King Xerxes sends out his own personal attendants throughout the empire to search for beautiful young virgin girls that would be pleasing to the king. And then once they were brought back to the palace and would be trained up in how to be and function as the queen, then the king would make his choice, and whoever he chose would be the new queen. And at the time of all of this, there was a Jewish man that was living in this fortress, the fortress of Susa, named Mordecai. And Mordecai had a cousin named Hadassah, who was also known as Esther. Mordecai had adopted her into his own family when her mother and father had died, and so Mordecai had basically helped raise this young woman. She was very beautiful, and the king's attendants thought that she would be suitable for the king as a possible future queen. So they bring Esther to the king, they bring her to the palace. She goes through this training period, really, of how to become the queen, how royalty acts, all of the different things that she needs to know to help the king run the country. And after this time period, the king is pleased with her well enough to bring Esther into the royal court, and he actually takes her and sets the royal crown on her head and declares that she is the queen. And after this, not only does he take care of Esther, but the king also brings in Mordecai, Esther's relative, and makes him a palace official and gives him some duties at the king's gate. Well, during this time, after all this has kind of happened, there's another character in the story that the king kind of raises up, and his name's Haman. Haman was the son of Hammedatha, the Agite, and he was placed over all of the nobles in the kingdom, making him the most powerful official in the empire. So he was over Mordecai, he was over everyone except the king and queen himself. And because of this, because Haman had such high authority, anytime he would walk by, people were meant to bow. They were meant to show the same respect that they would show to the king as well. Well, one day Mordecai didn't particularly like that. And so Mordecai decided that he wasn't going to bow to Haman this time. And this really infuriates Haman. Haman kind of goes off the deep end, has a little bit of a psychopathic edge in him. And Haman decides that because one Jew made him mad, that all of the Jews just needed to die. And because of that, and because Haman had such high authority in the court, Haman wrote a decree with the king's name and signed it like it had the king's approval, and decided that all of the Jews in the kingdom must be killed. And when Mordecai heard about this, he decided that he had to do something about it. He couldn't just let his people, his family, his culture, all of them, he couldn't just let them die. And so kind of really to prevent a biblical Holocaust, Mordecai goes to Esther. And this is kind of where we pick up really in Esther chapter 4. And Esther and Mordecai are talking. And Esther just makes the reference to, or Mordecai makes the comment to Esther, for if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish, and who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. And after Mordecai makes this powerful statement, really, about Esther's identity in the kingdom and what her purpose and all of this should be, it kind of gets to Esther. And so Esther tells Mordecai to go and tell all of the Jews in the kingdom to fast for 3 days. And Mordecai and Esther join in as well. And then at the end of those 3 days, Esther has an option. She can approach the king. If the king holds out his scepter to her, then that means that she's okay, that she's welcome to approach the king, talk to him, discuss whatever she needs to talk to him about, and everything's good. But if he doesn't raise his scepter, then that means that she has trespassed before the king, and the punishment for that is death. So there's quite a dilemma here. It's easy to understand why Esther called a fast. But during this, or at the end of this fast, Esther makes a decision and says, you know, my uncle's right. And she has a moment of bravery, and she stands up before the king or before Mordecai, and she says, hey, I'm going to go to the king. And if I die, then I die. And so here we see that Esther was willing to put everything on the line to do what she knew that she had called to do, to fulfill the purpose that God had given her. And I think this is a beautiful example of kind of what Christ has called us to do as believers and as Christians who were just once a hurting, broken, lost group of people, but have now been accepted by the King into the kingdom. And there's a responsibility now that comes with that. And so as Esther continues on, and as we continue in the story, Esther goes to the king, and of course, like our king, King Jesus, the king was more than accepting. He holds out the rod. Esther's allowed to approach the king, and the king just asks, Esther, what do you want? What can I do for you? What can I do for my wife? And Esther decides, let's hold a banquet. And so her one request is that the king would attend this banquet that Esther's going to hold. So the king agrees. And at this banquet, the king has this idea that he wants to kind of really recognize Mordecai while they're there. Just previously up to this banquet, there had been an attempt on the king's life to kill him, and Mordecai was kind of the guy that put a stop to it, that prohibited it from happening. So because of that, the king at this banquet wanted to celebrate Mordecai as well, since they were already there to celebrate something. So during this time, the king actually takes his own royal robe, wraps it around Mordecai, and shows that, hey, this man has saved the king's life. He has the king's approval, like the king is indebted to him. He is thankful for him. And this really makes Haman mad. Obviously, Haman has set out on this plot to kill the Jews, all really because of Mordecai. And so Haman kind of loses his mind. Haman goes out and makes a pole that he decides that he's going to impale Mordecai with. Like, that's his goal here. Well, during this banquet, when all this is happening, the king calls to Esther and says, okay, so what did you really want to talk about? Like, what was really the goal of this banquet? And Esther just tells him. She tells him everything. She tells him about Haman's plan, about the decree signed in the king's name to kill all of the Jews. And because of this, like, the king had no knowledge of this, and because of it, he was outraged, which rightfully so. And so he goes and he finds Haman, and he actually ends up having Haman impaled on the same stick that Haman had made to impale Mordecai on, and kind of an ironic turn of events. And so during all of this, we see this beautiful picture of how Esther, in and of herself, took the risk. She took the leap of faith. She went to the king with her request, and because of that, she ended up saving an entire nation. It's probably not within reason to say, had Esther not done this, then history could possibly record two major Holocaust for the Jewish people. Not just the one surrounding the events of World War II, but a much, much earlier one in human history during the biblical time period. But Esther teaches us a valuable lesson as believers here. Esther teaches us that even though the odds are against us, even though there's always this possibility of, hey, things could go south, this could not go my way, that it's always worth the risk. It's always worth the risk, taking the step out, doing what the Lord has called you to do, recognizing the opportunity that you're in, and really being a vessel for the Lord. And I think Esther's success here really just paints the picture of how important this is. This isn't something that is like a really good pump you up speech. Like, this could literally save lives. Like, you going out and taking the risk and talking to that friend or that person that most people don't talk to could be the thing that saves their life. You taking the risk and going out and starting that ministry on your school campus that you don't think will work, or that no one will come to, that people will make fun of you for starting, it's worth the risk. It could save someone's life. And even if it doesn't work out, Esther still had the boldness to at least try. Even if nothing else works, Esther was willing to lay down her life for the purpose and plan that God had placed on it, just so that she could see it fulfilled. And at the end of the day, is that not better than have never even trying? And so I want to thank you again for listening to this. I hope that this has in some way encouraged you with the story of Esther to really just go out and realize that, hey, maybe you were placed in the situation or in the circumstances that you're in now for this particular time for a reason. That there could be an opportunity of why you're experiencing all of this chaos that you're in right now, and that just maybe the Lord wants to use you to do something incredible in the lives of those around you. Thank you again for listening. Have a blessed night.